Hello everyone, hello. Let's wait for a while for people to pop up. Yes, unfortunately, apologies for any distress of seeing me in daylight. I look better in the shadows, so apologies for inflicting my face upon you. We're just starting off the live video now, so I'm just going to flip the camera around. You don't have to look at me too much. Hello everybody, it's 14 of you, that's good. Hopefully a few more. Oh, 16 going up now. Hello Stacey, yes, hello everybody. Hello to you in Denmark. Yes, we may be talking about some of your ancestors perhaps at some point during the video. So 20 now, well I'll start then and the rest can join in. Hello from Nottingham, Robin Hood country, hello there. So this building you see in front of me, this beautiful, beautiful building, this was York's County Hospital up until the late 70s, 1977. Not long before I came into the world. That's how old I am, unfortunately. 1978 I came along. Anyway, this building here dates back to the 1849 when they first started building it. And they built in style, as you can see. You know, not many hospitals look like this nowadays. But the building itself wasn't the original hospital. That was started back in 1740. So much earlier. Probably not quite so grand back then. And it had about 100 beds. Now, like most things in York, if it stays empty long enough and it's nice enough, it becomes flats. And this is no different, of course. But it's a hospital, or was a hospital. And there are those who say that some of the former patients haven't quite gone yet. Yes. See, a lot of people, obviously, sadly, didn't make it out alive. Which is unfortunate, but unfortunately par for the course, even nowadays. And so those who live here, well, let's just say they've experienced one or two odd occurrences. Some people report hearing footsteps walking down the corridor, but when they have a look, there's nobody there. Now, that could be explained away, of course. But then there was a case of a woman who found the sheets in the morning, all neatly folded, hospital-style, at the bottom of the bed, and she hadn't done it, she'd been asleep, so that was a bit of a worry. And somebody else felt there was somebody in bed with them. Now that is a worry, especially if you live on your own. You know, I mean, some of us a bit lonely at the moment, would be glad of the companionship, but yeah, when you realise you're on your own and there's somebody in bed with you, it's like, jump out of bed, turn the lights on, have a look around, make sure there's nobody there, and then maybe sleep on the sofa, I don't know, but yeah, perhaps not what you want. And people say they have also heard cries and moans and people weeping, you know, some of the former patients sadly not very happy. So yes, it's a beautiful old building, but maybe one to visit rather than live in. Looks very nice though. Better not point my camera at the window so people might think I'm spying on them. That's not something you want, is it? Now this is a bit different to obviously the other videos. For a start, it's daylight, so there's more people around, so I won't be hanging around in any one place for too long probably, but feel free to ask questions. Oh, hello Stephanie from York, a familiar face. So we're heading down to ye olde Sainsbury's. Yeah, exciting. I'm not going to go and pop in and buy a sandwich on a meal deal or anything. Well, maybe later. We'll see about that. But it's actually more the car park I'm interested in. No, I'm not a car park spotter. I'm not an anorak. Well, I am, but not for car parks anyway. But it's actually what's underneath the car park itself that I'm more interested in, really. See, back in the 80s, they were building this car park for what was called Safeways at the time. And they made a bit of a grim discovery. They found human remains. Now, I mean, obviously you dig things up in York, you're bound to find one or two, but this was a lot more than that. They excavated 500 skeletons, believe it or not. 500 skeletons. That's a lot, quite a bit. And so they had to down tools, of course. They had to stop. They called in the archaeologists to do the actual excavation and digging up, of course. Do it all professionally, make sure everything's done right. And they estimate there's in fact 1,000 bodies underneath this car park. But what was it? Was it the site of a great battle, perhaps? Maybe a plague pit? You know, we did have the plague quite a bit in York. No, actually, in fact, it was a Jewish cemetery. Da, da, da. Spoilers. See, a bit of a plot development there. We didn't know it was here. We hadn't decided to just dig it up, obviously. That was an unfortunate byproduct of digging up in York. You see, the Jews weren't around in England for quite a long time. We had a Jewish community in York, quite a large Jewish community, but for various reasons, which I'm going to go into as we go around, they weren't around at the time, of course, so we didn't know that this was here. Edward I had banned all Jewish people from England for hundreds of years. So when Shakespeare wrote about Shylock in the Merchants of Venice and so on, never actually met a Jew, probably. Yeah, they were banned from England. So nobody knew that the cemetery was actually here. So it was all an accident. But of course, once you've uncovered it, what do you do? Well, they could have obviously just stopped and built it somewhere else, but, well, you know, it cost a lot of money, wouldn't it? You know, that's not very popular. So eventually they decided to build the car park anyway, with a few modifications. But in interest of sensitivity, of course, they called in the chief rabbi of England. He came along and he reconsecrated the ground, and they built the car park over the bodies, which are all still there. So it's this area, ancient Jewish cemetery here, right next, of course, to the haunted former hospital. So this is one of the most spooky Sainsbury's you'll find around. There is a plaque for the Jews here as well, you know, just a reminder. But the whole area was renamed because of this discovery. It was renamed Jewbury. Now, it does sound a bit like a bad pun about burying Jews. It isn't. Basically, Jewbury would have been the title of this area, the name of this area, the Jewish borough, basically, where the Jewish community would live back in the olden days. So it's more respectful than perhaps it sounds. But yes, it's a sad reminder of part of our history there. They did actually find that some of the bodies, in fact, they'd all died really of natural causes. There was one chap they found that had some work done on him. He'd had an operation. Probably didn't work by the fact he's in the cemetery, but so yeah, it wasn't foul play as such. So there we go. I'll be coming a little bit back to the Jews a bit later on though. Now, just in case you think I'm making it up, it's not. This sign there you see on the lamppost, Jewbury. There you go. And these, of course, are the city walls, or parts of them anyway. Parts of these walls go back all the way to the 1200s. So, of course, the original Roman walls go all the way back to the year 71 AD. And there's bits of those still around, but this is medieval. And you might notice it ends there. Why would it end there? Did we demolish it? Well, no. Unlike the other parts of the wall, part of which was demolished by the Victorians in the 1830s, this bit didn't stretch around the entire wall city. It didn't need to, because I'll come over here. Don't drop my phone, obviously. This is the River Foss, the smaller of York's two rivers. And well, back in the day, a chap called William the Conqueror, who you might have heard of, he basically came along, and in 1068 he built a castle in York, and he also dammed up this river here, which flooded the entire area for further than you can see, really, all the way down there and here as well. And it became a huge man-made lake known as the King's Fish Pool. He said it's stocked full of fish for his table and for his friends and soldiers and allies and so on. But it also provided a defence in this area of York. So there wasn't any need to have a big wall here. We'd have to swim across, and that wouldn't really get you very far because the water was probably very dirty. By the time you get across, you're probably going to get shot at by people anyway. So yeah, there was no real need to build a wall here. So this section of wall directly in front of me, you could get on from Monk Bar, a bit further down there, or you can go all the way from Bouvan Bar, which basically is near York Minster and Exhibition Square. You have to go around clockwise these days due to COVID regulations. Whether that will remain in place forever, we don't know, but I'll get across anyway. Got these newfangled signs if you do come to York, replacing the old signposts. So if you do get a bit lost and there's nobody like me around to ask, you can always look at these. And you'll find these useful information plaques as well at the end of each section of the walls, telling you various information. Of course, you can see about the Jews down there and so on. Do a quick shot up the walls for you. I can't walk up this bit. We're going backwards, but there we go. So this is just part of the walls, and there's little kind of plaques, you'll see little markers as well on the pavement that will point you in a direction of the next section. You can see one down there. See, if you follow these little studs, you'll find your way around to the next section anyway. But we're now in an area known as Peasholm Green. Basically, it used to be a place where they grew peas, as the name might suggest. It was a big marshy sort of field, and that's basically where they grew lots of peas. I'm sure you're interested in knowing that, if you like peas. If you don't like peas, sorry about that. But this building which I'm pointing the camera at, this is St Cuthbert's. St Cuthbert's, and obviously please ask me to repeat myself if you can't hear me with the traffic. This is St Cuthbert's. So you can see it's had a bit of work done. The building itself dates back basically from the 15th century. Still an active place of worship, St Cuthbert's House of Prayer. It's had a bit of work done, as you can tell. And you can see the windows there. You see two small windows down there. They're believed to be, or were believed to be, what's called a leper's squint. Basically, you know, people with leprosy could look through the windows, but you didn't really want them in the church during a service, you know, perhaps for obvious reasons. But you'll notice there's a door over there, the big door, you go in, and there's this little door just over here. Now this is called the Devil's Door. If you've been watching any of my previous videos, you'll know a bit about this, but for the benefit of those that weren't, and also for those who want to get a good look at one, I'm going to go a bit closer and have a look at it and tell you a bit about it. So I think I'm allowed in here. There's no one around anyway, so I'm going to do it. Why not? Why not? Be quick about it though, just in case. So you see the door and see how small and narrow it is. You know, it'd be very hard to squeeze through there, but you could just about do it. But the reason for its existence was that they believed back in the day that if you weren't baptised, you might have the devil inside you. And so it's particularly important when you're having a christening to open this door. See, when you baptise somebody, you put the holy water on them, and the devil is forced to flee. However, you don't want the devil hanging around inside your church. It's, you know, not the best thing, you know, interrupting the sermons, you know, hogging the pews, nicking the prayer books. So basically, you open this door during the christening and the devil can flee out of the church, is a general idea. What was supposed to happen then, I'm not 100% certain. I've tried looking into it, but, you know, doesn't seem to be too much about that. Possibly he'd disappear in a puff of fire and brimstone, or maybe he'd just go to the nearest pub, I don't know. Don't blame him if he did. So this is what's left of the cemetery. Quite a few grave markers still there, and you'll notice it's raised up. Now York had a lot of cemeteries. In medieval times, about 50 cemeteries, believe it or not. 50 cemeteries. And that's why they estimate there's about 500,000 people buried underneath the city centre, going back many, many thousands of years, all people who've lived here. But the reason why the cemetery is raised up is because the cemeteries in the city centre were quite small and they got full up pretty quickly, to be honest. And so what they would do is pile earth on top of the graves that were already there and bury somebody else, you know. But that meant the graves were very shallow, of course, and would smell quite a bit. And it also wasn't very good from the point of disease. You see, back in the day, a lot of people weren't actually buried in coffins. You think burial coffin, but that wasn't the way back in the time. People were buried in shrouds or winding sheets, basically. Most people couldn't afford a coffin, it was quite expensive. And, you know, they couldn't be put to that kind of expense because people were dying a lot. It was such a common thing that, you know, I mean, if you had to get a nice wooden coffin for everybody in your family that passed away, you'd have long since, you know, probably starved to death yourself from not being able to buy food. So they built these graves on top of each other, and of course bodies do decay, and lots of people had died of diseases like cholera, waterborne diseases, and lots of people lived very close to each other, cheek by jowl, in little slum houses, and got their water from wells in the garden, which obviously go right down into the ground. And of course, as the bodies rotted, they'd sort of seep into the ground and into the water supply, and then of course other people would catch cholera and other diseases, so it wasn't very healthy. And so kind of this is what eventually led to them building cholera cemeteries outside of the city, as you can see on my last video if you did watch that one. If not, it should still be available. If not, I can post some pictures of it anyway, so if you haven't. But it's one of the first things you see when you come into the city by train, so there you go, a bit of a grim welcome to York. So this, of course, being only one of the few churches that we have in York. It was said once upon a time that York had a monastery for every day of the week, and that we had a church for every week of the year and a pub for every day of the year. Now that's no longer the case. If it ever was 100% true, it might be exaggeration. But yeah, sadly York's gone a bit downhill since then. We don't have any monasteries left now, not like this one. And these churches, we're down to about 20 churches now. And pub-wise, unfortunately, depending if they all open again after Corona, well, pub-wise we're down to about 200 or less, unfortunately. But that's still quite a decent number of pubs anyway. And talking of that, as you can see, we're heading towards one now. Unfortunately, I can't go in. Well, we'll wait a while. Be able to sit in the beer garden next month, I think, if all goes to plan. Nice wood timbered building, and you might think, oh, it's just one of those wood timbered pubs, you know, for the tourists. It looks all nice and oldie worldy. This, in fact, is pretty oldie worldy. It was built in 1417 in the 15th century there, and it's only been a pub for the latter part of its existence because it used to be a house. There you go, wood timbered house there. Amongst many people who've lived there was in fact one of the Lord Mayors of York. So, you know, quite a nice house for the times. You see it's got a nice swan up there. The mucky duck, as some people call it. I'm going to go across in just a minute. But you'll also see one of the black cats of York there. If you know York, you'll know there's quite a lot of cats, about 23 cats on different buildings around York. So it's be good luck to see them. They're known as Tom Adams cats because of a local architect who adopted them as his symbol, his trademark. But there are some cats that go back before he was around, so it's been a kind of York tradition for quite a long time. Now, as you might expect, with such an old building, it's got a lot of history, and it's got some ghost stories. It does say in here, though, of course, Sir Martin Bowes, Lord Mayor of London, in 1545, was the grandfather, and it's home of William Bowes, MP. So there we go. Just give you a bit of information there. Yeah, it's a very amazing building. It's very nice. You can go inside. You can actually spend the night here. It's got a couple of bedrooms you can rent. They do good food too. But about the ghosts. Well, there's quite a few ghost stories attached to this building. One of them is of a woman in white. She sits down by the fire, looking into the fire, seeming to be quite forlorn and, you know, miserable. But nobody's ever really got a good look at her face. They say she might be a jilted bride, but of course you can't really ask her. If you get too close, she just turns and walks away through the wall, disappears. There's also a little man down in the bottom bar down here. It's a chubby little man, wearing a bowler hat, checking his watch, waiting for somebody to come. But then he must get a bit impatient because they don't turn up, and then he just walks away again, vanishes in the region near the gents' toilets. Off he goes. Who was he? We don't really know. There's a young boy seen in there too, a bit mischievous, so they say, dressed in Victorian clothes, and a guy called Jack, who apparently was, or at least looks like a highwayman, often seen in the kitchen area quite frequently. And there's even a cursed stool by the fireplace. If you sit on that stool, why they haven't moved it, I don't know, but if you sit on that stool, unfortunately it brings bad luck to you, so be careful. Maybe ask before you sit down in here, or just stand at the bar, maybe safer. But by far the strangest ghost in here, or probably in the whole of York in fact, was seen by the landlord, so he was hopefully sober, we don't know. It was just a pair of legs running up the stairs. Now, bad joke coming, warning. You know, most people go to a pub to get legless. He's done it the other way round. But yeah, I know, it's a bad joke. Can't help it. I've done a few tours. I used to come past here on bus tours. And that's one of the ones I used to bore the tourists with. So, you know, the old ones are the best. Or not, as the case may be. Before we go any further, I'm going to point out this sign here, Old Walk. Very old name this for this street. The street itself isn't that old. The buildings in it anyway aren't that old. But Old Walk is an old English name. It predates the Vikings, in fact. I'm not 100% sure what it means. I think it's referring to the walls and the defences of the city, but there you go. Yes, reactions to my joke, I know. They're not good, are they? I've been in lockdown like everybody else. I haven't had a chance to update my materials, so I'm working on it. It's a work in progress. So looking across the road though, you'll see this housing development here. It says Hungate, which is the area we're going into now. But a few years ago, there was a massive archaeological dig here in Hungate. It lasted for 5 years, the project. They dug up all sorts of things from various different eras of York history there. A lot of Viking things, medieval things, even a few Roman things underneath here. And of course, now that that's all been dug up and excavated, they're free to develop the site into something a bit more modern. But yes, always find something interesting if you go digging around in York. A lot of the things they found, of course, are on display in various museums in York. So when they all reopen, hopefully won't be too long now, provided we all keep our heads and stick to the rules, or try to, then you know, hopefully things will open up again. You can come to some of the museums and have a look at them, really. Now this area we're heading up is called Stonebow. Didn't used to be a road here for a long time. You wouldn't be able to come all the way directly up here, but it was all opened up, and you can see very modern buildings here on my right hand side. I'm hurrying up to get to the next bit because you don't really want to look at these modern buildings, do you? Although there is one that's probably worth a mention. This grey building here, some people might call it a carbuncle really. This is Stonebow House. Voted about the ugliest building in York, to be honest. It's not very popular with the locals. They don't like the brutalist architecture there. It doesn't really fit in with the local atmosphere and stuff. So yes, Stonebow House. Perhaps not one to bother looking at too long. But over here, let's go have a look over here. We have another church. St Saviour Gate Church there. Another 15th century church. Ooh, just checked. The old fortification, there you go. So I was kind of right, wasn't I? So inside St Saviour Gate Church is where they have the Hungate Dig Museum, owned by Jorvik, who own the Jorvik Viking Centre obviously. And the Hungate Dig Museum has a lot of the artefacts that were found over there. It also apparently has a Viking ghost. Yes. We've quite a lot of Vikings in our history, not too much talk of Viking ghosts, but in there was a chap apparently skinned alive by the locals, and he's not very happy about it, as you imagine. People say there's been all sorts of poltergeist style activity inside there, so they decided to open a museum there, as you do. Hopefully it's all calmed down now, but yes, one ghost hunter apparently was so scared he actually died in there. So maybe he's hanging around there too, we don't know. Anyway, St Saviour Gate, worth going into. Good little museum for the kids if you bring them to York. This, anyway, moving on swiftly, is Black Horse Passage, as the sign says. I'm sure you can read. Now the alley itself doesn't look that old, but like most alleys, or snickelways to give them their York name, there's been an alleyway here since Viking times, about 1,000 years or more. So yeah. Sorry about that, bit of a problem with the connection there. Hope you can all still see and hear. So anyway, heading down Black Horse Passage. Now this, once upon a time, was a very poor part of York. Lots of poverty, lots of vice, unfortunately too, as it was also used by a lot of ladies of the night. However, it's not quite so simple as that, you see. You might think, oh well, why didn't the police sort this out? Well, there was an Inspector Turner who was on the night shift back in the day, and it turns out he was leasing a lot of the properties around here out to the ladies of the evening, and therefore profiting by immoral earnings, as they say. So actually the police were very much in on it, and in fact when surveyed, a lot of the ladies of the evening said that 1 in 6 of their clients were actually members of the police force, some of them actually on active duty at the time. So yeah, perhaps not the most efficient police force. They were just all in on it themselves really. This Straker's Passage, of course, another little snickelway. The clergy got in it too as well, you know, historically in York. They had their fingers in a few pies in that department, shall we say. Story for another time, perhaps. Anyway, here we are, heading down. So this leads us down to Fossgate. Now, it's a merchant quarter of York now, and lots of nice restaurants and bars down here when they all reopen. So if you're looking for something to eat or drink when you come to York, you could do a lot worse than coming down here. You'll find some very nice little places. Oh, the door's open. Wasn't expecting that. Might even get a sneaky picture down there. This is the Merchant Adventurers Hall. Not currently open to the public. Opened in 1357 originally. I'm going to impress you, or try and impress you with my Latin at the moment. Basically it means God grant us good fortune, that little motto there underneath. And yes, I did look that up, to be honest, I'm cheating. You can get a look down there though, very quickly. We're going to see it better from the other side though, so don't worry. But that's a brief glimpse in there. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Hope everyone's enjoying it anyway. Hope you're all good. Yes, do definitely take your kids down to the dig. Absolutely. Yes, Martin, yeah. Well, that's it. Well, maybe the ghost hunter is still hunting the ghost, not realising he himself is a ghost. That would be ghostception, wouldn't it? Some kind of a paradox or whatever. I'm just rambling now, sorry. There we have, oh, sorry, another restaurant. This is the Blue Barbican. They used to be known as the Blue Bicycle for a very long time. It's been bought out since then. Now the Blue Bicycle, in days gone by, a lady used to live there, and as mentioned before, she was of a certain occupation, and she would leave the bicycle outside, pretty much like this one in fact, outside, to indicate to potential customers that she may well be available for business, shall we say. Yes, that doesn't happen anymore, not there anyway. Can't speak for everywhere in York. I'll leave you to find your own information about that sort of thing though. Now here we are. This is the Red Lion pub there. One of York's many pubs. See, I did tell you we had quite a few. Let's hop across there. The Red Lion isn't its original name, of course. There's lots of Red Lion pubs though. It's pretty ubiquitous. It used to be known as the Three Cups. Now the building itself is pretty old. Lots of the timbers are Tudor, 16th century timbers, although the building itself goes back further, and that's around the 12th or 13th century. And I found all sorts of things when I've been looking around there, including a priest hole. Now, won't go into all the details, but obviously back in the day, being a Catholic was a very dangerous occupation, especially if you were a priest, and you could be arrested, you could be tortured, executed, all sorts of things could happen to you. So it was obviously worth hiding away, if you could. And those who were loyal to the Catholic cause would build little holes and places for people to hide in. But it might have had somebody more famous hiding there a little bit more recently, in the 1700s, as it's said that Dick Turpin, the famous highwayman, who was captured here in York and executed here in 1739, might have tried hiding inside there from the authorities using that priest hole. And there are those who say, quite possibly to attract tourists, that Dick Turpin still haunts the pub. That hasn't been verified, but there have certainly been a few things going bump in the night in there. Whether it's Dick or somebody else, we don't know. But come down anyway, have a pint, why not? Let's go round to the Merchant Adventurers Hall anyway. As I say, being a live daytime tour, I'm not going to stick in one place too long. There's lots of people around. Got to try the old social distancing and all that. So that's a different view of the Merchant Adventurers Hall. Another problem, of course, the traffic. Well, I'll try and avoid that. But so yeah, you can see there. It's worth going to, definitely. It's quite a good tourist attraction. There's the old hall in there, the chapel as well, and the Undercroft. And it was in fact used as a hospital for a while, an almshouse for the poor, for those who couldn't afford somewhere to live or couldn't afford medical care, food, etc. And so a lot of people were treated in there. And like the the county hospital I mentioned earlier on. So like the county hospital I mentioned earlier on, of course, sadly, not everybody lived. They died in there too. Some people were born in there too, of course. If you were what they would term a fallen woman back in the day, and having an illegitimate child, as they would term it, you may well give birth to them in there as well. So yes, and people have had all sorts of strange occurrences, not surprising in a property going back to 1357, and it's still very much in use today as well for meetings, events, weddings and so on. They've seen ghostly children, a woman looking like a nun who's probably one of the nurses in there. They've had paranormal evenings and ghost hunts in there too. People doing, you know, with having the pendulums and the ghost boxes and so on. Contacted various people, merchants, judges and other dignitaries. So definitely a place to come to, whether you're interested in history or interested in ghosts or both. This is definitely one of the places to tick off when you come to visit York. I know some people have had gone on ghost hunts there. I've not managed to go on one myself, but they did say they had quite a few encounters. There's an area known as the men only room, and women tend to feel very uncomfortable in there, as though some kind of force intimidating them there. Which, given the history of the building, I imagine, you know, there were certain places that women were not welcomed back in the day, unfortunately, so probably par for the course. Heading down here. Usually quite a few ducks and geese around here, but I can't see them anyway. But yeah, definitely go to the Merchant Adventurers Hall. Sometimes they have like craft stalls and other things in there too as well, you know. So there's lots of different reasons to go, even if you're not a big history buff. And you can have tea and coffee there, so why not, hey? Why not? I'm just rambling to make time as I walk down here. as you can imagine. Don't worry, it does get a bit more interesting than this in just a minute. Oh. Which is less than the national living wage in this country. There we go. One of the geese. Is that a geese or dog? I think it's a geese. A goose. Rather, a goose. Sorry. Birds, not my expertise. But there we go. So we're heading down towards another car park. Yes, I know I said I wasn't fascinated by car parks, but I do tend to spend a bit of time in them. I don't know why. It's a weird thing. I can't help myself. But there you go. That, as you may know if you visited York before, is Clifford's Tower. You're not really seeing it at its best though. It's going for a bit of restoration at the moment. In fact, it's going to have a roof for the first time since 1648. Now, why is it not had a roof all that time? It's not because they're lazy and they couldn't be bothered. Basically, they wanted to keep it sort of as it was, because back in the day, it had a roof until an accident happened. Since 1648, there was still a garrison of soldiers stationed here, and it was St George's Day, probably a nice sunny day, and everyone's parading through, the Lord Mayor in his regalia, all that sort of thing, waving to the crowds. And of course the soldiers set off their cannons in salute. However, people hadn't really come up with health and safety legislation back then, and the gunpowder was stored in yonder tower. And well, I don't know quite how it happened, you know, stray spark, maybe somebody had, you know, their eyes on the parade and not on what they were supposed to be doing, you know, maybe left a pipe smouldering, who knows, speculation. But suddenly, bang, loud bang, unexpected firework display, bang, went the roof, the whole place was on fire. Apparently the chap inside though did survive, according to local folklore, was found floating around the moat. We still had a moat here back then, so that put out any bits of his that were a bit singed. For those of you who've not really seen Clifford's Tower before the scaffolding, it looked like this basically. So you can see no roof, but the rest of it's mostly intact. But that, of course, was only a small part of York's castle. Got the Castle Museum here directly ahead of us, which hopefully will be open again fairly soon. I don't know if it's going to be in June or whatever. We'll have to see. We'll have to see when indoor attractions can open again. Hopefully before then. This was for a long time York's prison, by the way. Lots of people executed here too, up until the late 1890s. We had the women's prison, the debtors' prison, of course, and a prison for those not long for this world. Towards the end, these doors here, on the side of the women's prison, this is where they would take you out to be hung as well, and what they called the new drop. So yes, you'd be taken out there and that would be the end of you, unfortunately. Well, then again, not perhaps unfortunately, depending on your views on punishment. But yes, worth going to the Castle Museum if you get the chance when it reopens. Anyway, let's back to what I was going to be talking about anyway, because I started off talking about, well, early on talking about the Jews, and this building, well, not this particular building, but a building that was on this site, has a sad connection to the Jews. In fact, a week from today, on the 16th of March, is the anniversary of what we know as the Massacre of the Jews, which happened here in York, 16th of March, 1190. Now, there's a lot about how it started, you know, lots of rumours and things as well, but basically the brief version was, we were fighting in the Middle East, Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, off fighting in the Middle East, and a lot of the money for himself and his knights had been lent by the Jewish community. They were allowed to lend money, the Christian church wasn't, but lots of people owed the Jews money, and of course that doesn't really make you very popular. You know, nobody likes a debt collector, do they? You know, so that was part of the reason why a lot of people sadly weren't too keen on the Jews, and of course there was lots of other reasons, lots of prejudices going back many centuries, of course. This being before the Jews were kicked out of England. But anyway, the tower that stood up there back in the day was made of wood, a wooden Norman tower known as the Great Tower. And there was an anti-Jewish riot in York. Started by an argument, a house was burnt down and people were being harried through the streets, people attacking them. And so people fled to the tower here. They'd been promised royal protection, and so they came here to the wooden tower. They were allowed entry, and there they were, surrounded by a baying mob demanding blood or baptism. Basically, they would say they would let them live if they came out and converted to Christianity. However, this wasn't really true. Lots of people there, of course, refused to come out, and so the tower was set alight, and 150 men, women and children died inside there. Very sadly, a lot of them chose to take their own life rather than perish in the flames, and a few did try and flee apparently and were attacked by the mob. So sadly, a terrible, terrible massacre, which we commemorate though every year, lest we forget. As you see, there's lots of daffodils around there. Lots of daffodils, and each of these a type of daffodil called February Gold. It has 6 petals like the Star of David. It's yellow, of course, and so that's how we commemorate, or one of the ways we commemorate, this terrible, terrible massacre. Just you may have seen this picture, or on my web page there on Facebook. This is basically what the castle would have looked like when it's still fully here. The stone tower was erected in the 1250s during the time of Henry III, replacing the old wooden castle there, but that's basically what it would have looked like, or something like that. And as you can see, the moat would have been down there. Now obviously nothing much remains now, of course, apart from the tower, which is going to be converted into a visitor's centre. But as grim as the story of the Jews, of course, is, it's not the only one. Lots of people died here. It was used as a prison for a while, and a mint, and made lots of money here and stuff. Well, against the king, King Edward II in this particular case, and he died. Yeah, not very good for him. And to basically make his point that trying to overthrow the king was not going to be good for anybody's health, they had his body hung up there in chains on the wall. Well, fast forward a few hundred, Henry VIII, if you can see me still, Henry VIII had a similar fate in store for a man known as Robert Aske. One of the things Henry's famous for, apart from having lots of wives and being very fat, was in fact that he had the monasteries torn down, which is why you won't see a lot of abbeys and monasteries that are intact in England at all. Now this was good for him, he got to keep the cash and the land, but perhaps not so good for the monks. Anyway, this was very unpopular with lots of people. Very devout Christians were not happy that these abbeys were being torn down and the monks turfed out. And so a man called Robert Aske, a lawyer, he led a pilgrimage called the Pilgrimage of Grace. They marched down to London with people joining them along the way, till there were tens of thousands of people all marching down there. And Henry got a bit worried. Yes, he could fight them, but lots of people there. He was very unpopular, and if it came down to a fight, possibility that his troops might not win. So anyway, he decided to be more diplomatic for a change. So he had somebody meet up with Robert Aske and his followers and said, "Look, I'll agree to your demands, and you can all go home. Nothing bad's going to happen to you, don't worry." But he obviously had his fingers crossed behind his back, because no sooner had the people disbanded and gone home, then he had the ringleaders, including Robert Aske, arrested. Now most of them were hung, drawn and quartered, which is a terrible, terrible way to die. You're basically dragged through the streets, then you're hung by the neck until you're almost dead. Not quite, you go a funny shade of purple, but then they cut you down, bring you round again, go, "Hello, wakey wakey," and then the next thing you know, it's a very sharp implement going inside you, followed by the hands of the executioner, who will pull your entrails out and hold them up in front of your face, which is not the nicest of things to happen to you, really, is it? Obviously you don't have much time to think about that before you die. They'll actually burn them in front of you too, of course, then you're usually dead. And then you'd be quartered, they'd chop off your head and your arms and your legs and send them to different parts of the country Because back in the day you couldn't send emails or social media, so this was the way of getting a message out to people that this person was really dead, and that if you didn't want the same fate, you better pay attention. So Robert Aske, he pled for mercy, and he was very eloquent, he was a lawyer. So Henry thought, okay, yes, I shall grant you mercy. Henry had a bit of a sense of humour, obviously, though, because mercy wasn't quite what ended up happening. Robert Aske was also hung in chains from the tower there behind me, and he was left there for a year and a day too. So yeah, not really what you'd think of when you think about mercy, really, is it? No. Well, anyway, if you do go in there when it's open again to the public, have a look around, because people do report strange kind of things going on there. You know, electrical equipment doesn't seem to work too well. People have picked up orbs, glowing orbs and mists and such on the camera. What did they do with the torso that was quartered? Well, usually basically bits they didn't want to display around were dumped in unmarked graves. Part of the reason for the hung drawing quartering process, or hanging drawing quartering process I should say, was that you couldn't really get to heaven. It was believed you had to be buried intact, or mostly intact, to get into heaven, because they believed in a literal resurrection on the final day when Jesus returns. You would literally rise from the grave, presumably becoming less mouldy as you got out of the grave. The idea, of course, being that if you had your head chopped off and all your major limbs and extremities chopped off, that was never going to happen for you, and you'd wander in eternal torment. So, you know, not just death, a very grisly death, but a fate worse than death, in fact. So there we go. So yes, they had it all sewn up, didn't they, really? You know, they got you going both ways, really. Make sure you couldn't ever get to heaven, which a lot of people obviously were more worried about back in those days. A lot of people aren't so bothered these days, more secular times we live in. But back in the day, life was short, often bloody and unpleasant. And so most people, of course, went to church to try and preserve their souls for posterity, because you may live less than 40 years back in those days, maybe a bit longer if you're lucky. But yeah, you know, your life was going to be fairly short, probably quite hard, but you could have an eternity in paradise afterwards, which is nice. So there we go. Which is why, of course, we have so many churches still around. Of course, some have active congregations. This one here, this one is closed. It's used for exhibitions now. You've got the Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, trying to pronounce it better, exhibition, which looks like it's going to reopen when things are allowed to. So there you go. It actually has the tallest spire of any church in York, this. Boring fact, perhaps, but there we go. Why not? So I'm going to head down this way anyway, to where the Jorvik Viking Centre is. Now, it was when they were building these shops, this shopping centre, they uncovered the remains of a Viking settlement down here. And of course, the Vikings, when they conquered York in 866, they called the place Jorvik. Written with a J, pronounced with a Y, by us anyway. So there we go. But they stayed here for quite a while, and this became a very thriving Viking settlement. And although they were very fierce warriors, very feared by the Saxons, but of course, once they were here, they sort of integrated quite well with the local people, to be honest. So we think of them as being vicious warriors, which they were, but there was a lot more to the Vikings than that. So you can find out a bit more of that here, of course. But, as I say, they dug up all these remains here, found thousands and thousands of artefacts, everything from shoes and combs to swords and all sorts of things, and helmets. You can all see down here, but they've actually recreated a whole Viking settlement down there. You go around the little time cars if you've never been inside. It takes you around on a track, you listen to an audio, and they have animatronics to basically, you know, enact day-to-day Viking life. You can also smell what Viking life was like, and you can imagine lots of people, unwashed people, living close together with poor sanitation and yes, and lots of animals too. It smells quite pungent, is what I'm trying to get to. But anyway, when they uncovered all of this down here, they seem to have woken something up, displaced some kind of energy perhaps, or woken the spirits of the Vikings, because people do report all sorts of strange activity here. There used to be a big sweet shop here called Craven's. York, of course, being famous for its chocolate and so on. One of the major factories was owned by Craven's, who had a big shop down here. Long since gone, unfortunately, but they all reported strange paranormal activity. Items being thrown off shelves, lights coming on when there was nobody to switch them on, things just basically breaking. Lots of strange noises too. You'd lock up, everything would be fine. You come back, the place looks like it's been ransacked. And it happens still. Alarms go off down here. All sorts of strange things happen. People are called out in the middle of the night to see what's happening. So yes, it still seems something's going on. And ironically, since they've obviously found lots of bodies in York, it tends to be centred around the body shop these days. I kid you not. So there we go. The body shop. Not just a bad joke, it happens to be true. Anyway, heading towards this church here. Yes, it's more churches, I know. You'll be feeling very devout and holy by the end of this, I'm sure. This tower, though, is quite impressive. It has, instead of a bell, a lantern tower. Back in the day, York was surrounded by thick forests, the forest of Galtres. So dense, it was populated by wolves and bears and all sorts of things. Wolves and bears, oh my. But yes, basically they had to light a lantern there so people could find their way through the forest into the city, and also helps you find your way through the dark streets of York to church. So there we go. It's a very important church though, the Guild Church of York. 34 Lord Mayors of York buried there. It used to be a bit wider. They had to knock that down part of it to build the road here. The street itself is called Coppergate, and it's a Viking street because, well, the Viking word for street is gate. They didn't pronounce it gate though, I think that's an English thing, but it was pronounced Garter. But it's, you know, Garter being the old Viking word for street. So you see a street in York, basically, it's called Gate. So the streets are called gates. The gates are called bars because of the French, the Normans who invaded. And because the bars are called pubs. So there we go. That's just confusing all the tourists. Hopefully you're still with me. I don't know. But there we go. Of course, the church itself has reported ghost sightings. A lady in white who shows up at funerals. Nobody knows who she is, or was rather. But she only ever appears at funerals, and there haven't really been any funerals here for a while. So she's not been seen around lately in York. How many churches in York? We have about 20 at the moment. They're not all still used as churches though. Some of them have been converted into places like the St Sampson's, which is used as a place, meeting place for the elderly, and this church still used for services, but a lot of them, like the one St Saviour Gate I mentioned earlier on, which I can see from here and point out to you. There you go, St Saviour Gate Tower, you can see, is where the Jorvik Hungate Dig Museum is, I should say. Owned by the Jorvik company though. So yeah, they all have a use still, even if they're not used as a place of worship. And they're worth popping into, even if you don't particularly like churches. Lots of interesting things going on. So we'll be finishing fairly soon, but thanks for staying with me. I'm going to mention one or two more things as we go around. There you have Lloyds Bank. Now, underneath Lloyds Bank, they did, of course, dig things up as you always do. As you expect no less. They found what was called a coprolite. Now, you might be ahead of me on this one, I don't know, but coprolite is basically a fossilised poo. Yeah, fossilised poo, and this one was pretty big. We're talking, you know, more than 6 inches long, this one. Pretty hefty by that standard. So yes, perhaps that's what killed the person who left it there, I don't know. But it's fossilised, and it's on display for your enjoyment in the Jorvik Viking Centre. You used to be able to pick it up, of course. Not anymore. Somebody found out what they were holding one day and went ugh, and dropped it on the floor, and it smashed and had to be stuck back together, probably by somebody with a PhD. So there you go. Joys of archaeology. After you, sorry. No, it's my fault. There we go. So as you see, getting closer to the centre, that's why I'm going to be finishing fairly soon. Whilst it's starting to rain a bit. So you see this sign here, it says pavement. Not the most imaginative name for a street. It was one of the first paved streets in York. And as you can see here, it does say this is where Sir Thomas Percy, 7th Earl of Northumberland, was executed by Marks and Sparks. We don't know if exactly was that spot, but in this area. Now, you will know from perhaps some of my previous videos that the Percy family were known as troublemakers in some respects. They were Catholics, and they rebelled quite a few times, different generations of the family, against the kings of the land. He rebelled against Queen Elizabeth I. When it all failed in his uprising, he fled to Scotland for sanctuary there, but was caught and brought back to York, and they erected a scaffold down here, and he was beheaded, and then his head was placed upon a spike on Micklegate Bar, the fate for most traitors in York, and remained there for about 2 years, till one day mysteriously vanished. We don't know what happened to it, but the theory is that one of the Catholics, maybe a member of the family or a friend, decided they couldn't bear looking at his head up there all the time and decided to replace it with somebody else's. They nicked the head anyway, they ran off. But this was 2 years after his execution, and you know, perhaps they couldn't quite remember where the body had been buried. He was buried in an unmarked grave down here, so they say, where St Crux Parish Hall is now. It used to be a much bigger church, so a lot of it had to be demolished in the 1800s for safety reasons. But they say somewhere around here is where the body of Sir Thomas was there. Now, be that as it may, as they say, they didn't know where the body was when they buried the head, or perhaps it got interrupted. They buried it at a church called Holy Trinity, which is just up the shambles down the far end on Goodrham Gate. Anyway, remember what I said about you having to be buried intact to rest in peace? Well, it seems that Sir Thomas Percy has not yet found his head, as people say they do report seeing a figure walking around the churchyard and around the surrounding streets, and he'd get closer. He looks like he's hunched over, but you get close enough, you find from the neck upwards there's nothing there, just a bloody stump. So yes, sadly he can't rest easy, as he's still trying to find his head. So there you go. Now, of course, being where we are, I can't avoid mentioning the Golden Fleece, most haunted pub in York. So they all say anyway. Built in 1503, owned by another Lord Mayor of York, not the one I mentioned before. This was John Peckett, and they had a tradition back in the day that if you were a Lord Mayor of York, you were Lord for a year and a day, but your wife remained a lady forever, basically. So she got a better deal out of it than you did. It was owned partly by the people who owned the Merchant Adventurers Hall, because you can see there's a sheep outside it where it gets its name from. They were wool traders. That was an important trade back in the day, so important that stealing a sheep was a hanging offence. So yeah, you don't want to get hung for stealing a sheep. Yes, even ghosts appreciate irony. Well, I hope they do. I do. Noisy bike. So, of course, there are many ghost stories about the Golden Fleece. Lady Alice Peckett, wife of Lord John Peckett, she seems to haunt the place still. She liked it. She didn't die an awful death, as far as anyone can tell. She just seems to like the place, and people who sleep in there's 5 bedrooms you can rent. One of them is hers, or was, and she still seems quite attached to it, and you might wake up and find her looking down at you. She's quite friendly though, doesn't really tend to do anything bad to you, but it might give you a bit of a start, you know. There's also other ghosts in there. We have a ghost of Jeff Munro, a Canadian airman who died here in the 1940s. He fell out of the window. Did he slip, or did he in fact commit suicide? We don't 100% know, but people have woken up and seen a silhouette of a man standing in their room, which obviously is quite scary. If, as I said before, you find yourself sleeping alone, you don't want to find somebody in the room, especially somebody who isn't there when you turn the lights on. There's also the ghost of One-Eyed Jack. He wears a red coat soldier's uniform and carries a pistol. Not seen very often, but usually down in the bottom bar if you do see him. And Robert, an old man, former local, used to go in the pub quite a bit. He looks quite grumpy a lot of the time. Obviously the cost of a pint has gone up exponentially since he was alive. He looks really solid though, really natural and human and normal, until you turn around and suddenly he's gone, disappeared. Young boy as well. He was run over by a horse and cart outside here in Victorian times. Sadly a common occurrence back in the day. He was carried inside to try and tend to his wounds, but sadly the poor little lad didn't make it. So he's sometimes seen looking out of the windows, and he can be quite mischievous, like the ghost of the little boy in A Black Swan. He likes to get up to mischief, has been known to pick pockets and move things around. You know, you put your pint down, you turn around, he's moved when you get back, or maybe your shoelaces are untied. So there we go. So you just still get up to a few pranks. The building next to it, this fine wood timbered building, is Herbert Bart House. Sir Thomas Herbert Bart used to live there back in 1606. He was one of the last servants of King Charles I. In fact, he was there before Charles was taken away to be executed, and he was given by King Charles a pocket watch. This is where they believe the tradition of giving a gold watch to somebody when they retire comes from. Obviously the king wasn't going to take it with him, but there you go. And you'll always find spirits in there if you find them in nowhere else in York, because as you can see, it's where they make York gin. So there's definitely spirits in there. I know, it's a bad joke again. I'm sorry, I can't resist. But thanks for staying with me so far anyway. You know, 49 of you watching, that's my jokes can't be that bad. So this is the Shambles, of course. You've probably all seen it many a time, but it's worth another look anyway. One of our other snickle ways, leading down to Whip Mawopna Gate, the shortest street in York. I'll give you a quick look at that whilst I'm here, why not? It's got a very odd kind of crux passage. It's got a very odd numbering system here. You've got 1A, and then you've got 1.5. So it's a bit of a odd numbering system. This is part of the old walls of the church. We're going down here. The gates used to lead to a cemetery, so we're walking through another cemetery, tying the theme together there. And here is Whip Mawopna Gate, the shortest street in York. It goes roughly from where the sign starts there, all the way up to the tapas bar over there. That's the entire length of the street, and translates roughly as what a street, or what's the point, perhaps you might want to say, but there we go. So if you have not been to York, that is something that people tend to point out. It's often on many walking tours. They'll be mentioned on various bus tours as well. There's not much to see, but it's a little bit of a thing anyway. So back to the Shambles, and then I'll shortly leave you. So of course the Shambles, probably the most famous and photographed street in England. The street's been here since before William the Conqueror invaded. It's mentioned in a Domesday Book written in 1086. And now it's populated largely by Harry Potter shops, who magically make your cash vanish, if you like Harry Potter. It's not been confirmed, but basically they say that they based Diagon Alley on this street. J.K. Rowling says different. She wasn't thinking about that, but apparently when Warner Brothers made the first film, they took a look at the Shambles and they based Diagon Alley on that, so there we go. Attracts lots of Harry Potter fans anyway. But the street gets its name from the wooden shelves outside the shops, which you can still see outside some of the shops. Many of the buildings date back to the 14th and 15th century, and the old word for shelf was shammel, and these were flesh shammels, because this was all butcher's shops all the way around, full of butcher shops. The animals themselves were slaughtered around the back of the shops in little yards, and the animals were hung above these shelves on hooks, and there are still some hooks you can see above some of the shops. Just over yonder you can see a few hooks, and the shelves there of course had meat on them too. Not very sanitary, of course. No hygiene certificates needed back in those days. And this little channel down where everyone likes to walk was basically where they used to put all the offal, all the blood and bits that they couldn't sell were just thrown out down here. so it would run red. But not just that, of course, people used to live above, and that's of course why we've got the overhanging bit there, because people used to basically throw the contents of their buckets and chamber pots out into the street down here. It'd all slip and slide its way down there and end up where Greggs the Baker's is now. So there we go, just to put you off your pasty if you're planning on having one later on. So it would have pretty much stunk. Sometimes only cleaned twice a month as well. So just before I go, one last thing. This is the shrine of Margaret Clitheroe, Saint Margaret, the Pearl of York as she's known. For a long time it was believed to be where she lived, but actually that was further up the street. But it's a shrine anyway, and when people are allowed to come and worship, it will be open to the public. And basically her crime, well, was being a Catholic, like Sir Thomas Percy really. Incidentally, the Percy family and Margaret Clitheroe were all related to members of the Gunpowder Plot. Guy Fawkes, of course, who was born here in York in 1570. In fact, a member of the party was called Thomas Percy, related to Sir Thomas there, of course, named after him. And St Margaret, well, she would have been known to the plotters as well. She was related to a couple of them. So anyway, she was hiding Catholic priests. Remember what I said about the priest hole at the Red Lion? She was hiding him inside there. Or inside the house, I should say, not the shrine. And so, when they found out, she was dragged away down to a small prison on the Ouse Bridge. She refused to basically say that she was guilty. She wouldn't admit her guilt. She thought she'd done nothing wrong. But she wouldn't also plead innocent. So basically, in order to get this confession out of her, she was laid down naked on the Ouse Bridge with a stone, sharp stone underneath her back. Her door was placed on top of her, and heavy stones were placed one at a time on top of that. She protested she was pregnant at the time, but that didn't stop them. Oh no. And she endured this agony, this crushing weight on her chest for 15 minutes. So eventually she died, and she didn't even utter a cry, apparently. She was so stoic in the face of this terrible punishment, and so this is why she became a saint. You can find out about her, of course, in lots of books about York, but you can actually see part of her as well. You see, they saved her hand. She was buried in an unmarked grave, but later on they found the body and gave her a proper Christian burial. But they saved her hand, which might seem an odd thing to do, but as I say, you had to be buried mostly intact to get into heaven. So they took her hand, and it's still on display in the Bar Convent, which is England's oldest working convent, built in 1686. It's still there. The nuns are still there too, not the originals, of course. They've gone off a bit since then, but yes, there are nuns still there, and if you go inside, her hand is still on display. It's still a bit black nowadays, a bit gnarled, but nevertheless. Now, of course, what about Margaret herself? Does her ghost still haunt the shambles? Well, people say they have seen things or felt things. Somebody, of course, claimed to have seen a woman in there praying when they went inside the shrine. They didn't want to interrupt her, of course, so they just had a look around, and as they were turning to leave, they noticed she'd gone, but there was only one way, in or out. So how did she get out without walking past them? Was it Margaret? So I'm going to leave you now, but just before I do, this is actually where Margaret lived. Now the Potions Cauldron, 9 3/4, or so they say, and those are some of the old meat hooks there. So I hope you've enjoyed this daytime walk around York. I aim to be starting walking tours for visitors to York again as soon as possible, depending on what the guidance is. Hopefully no later than May. So keep your eyes peeled on that, and obviously if you want to come to York, please book. I'll be more than happy to take a booking from you, and obviously if anything happens and we have to change plans and you have to cancel, don't worry, you can get a full refund, so don't worry, I'm not going to take your money and run. But enough about that, and oh, just one final thing, not being too cheeky, but I will put a PayPal link at the end, just in case you want to drop any coins in there if you've enjoyed tonight, or today I should say. But anyway, I shall leave you now. Enjoy, take care.